Rings of Power is a walking contradiction. What do I mean by that? To be honest, I didn't have high hopes going into the show, but I wanted to. However, as a screenwriter and a big Tolkien fan, this show was worse than I expected. Let's examine some of the elements of this story, especially how the writing constantly contradicts itself that made this show infuriating for me to watch, and what you can do to avoid the same thing in your own screenwriting.
Together, we're going to tell a story that I think is of some importance now.
There are lots of other people have had many areas of Rings of Power to critique, like the lore, the directing, the costume design, the fight choreography, the world building, and even its philosophy. And there's so much more, but many creators have already covered that. So instead, I want to focus on the screenwriting, ostensibly the most important factor of any film or TV show. I want to focus on how the show's repetitive contradictions pull viewers out of the story and thus undercut its emotional impact. I'm not even talking about the changes that the showrunners made to Tolkien's world. There's Tolkien experts out there that know way more about that than I do. I'm just talking about the ways in which the story is inconsistent with itself within the new narrative that the writers have created. And this is not meant to be an attack on the writers or anyone else involved in the making of the show. Adapting anything for a huge corporation like Amazon with fan base as huge as Tolkien has is going to be really, really difficult no matter who does it. I'm instead trying to use this as a case study for the areas that went wrong so that I and other screenwriters and storytellers can turn a critical eye to our own stories and thus hone our craft. We'll cover 3 examples of these contradictions, one each in the show's symbols, characters, and themes. First up, let's talk about symbols, or in this case, the massively important and not at all inconsequential sword-hilt key of doom. Starts out, we've got this mystery. Where's Sauron? What does his symbol mean? What's his plan? Then we've got this teenager, Theo, who reveals that he found, off-screen, of course, this creepy broken sword in a box under Waldreg's barn. Keeps it a secret. He shows his buddy. Okay, whatever. Mystery box MacGuffin sword has been established. The plot thickens. The sword actually connects you to the Dark Lord. And hear the dark speech. Whoa, this thing must have a special connection to Sauron like the One Ring, huh? No, it's literally a plot device and nothing more. Theo is nearly killed because he's got the sword. And then what's the message that J.R.R. tells Arondir to bring to the Southlanders? Where's the sword hilt that I need? No, it's
that your people may live if you forsake all claim to these lands.
Not really a clear motivation, is it? Even in episode 4, you've got Waldreg that says,
"There's no sword. There's a power fashioned for our ancestors by his master's own hand. The beautiful servant. He was lost, but shall return. Have you heard of him, lad? Have you heard of Sauron?"
So it seems like this sword has got this big connection to Sauron, right? When he sees the real sword, Arondir recognizes it from the hidden sword in the wall. And so this whole time, in all of these episodes, the writers have set up this sword to be a magical part of Sauron and part of his plan to return. Kind of like the ring in Lord of the Rings, but in a smaller way. But then the sword turns out to just be a glorified key.
It's a key.
No. Much more better. It is a drawing of a key.
In fact, Arondir actually knows that it's a key, but not to what? How could you know that? And then later, episode 6, he even tells Galadriel, you didn't tell her what it was or why he shouldn't escape with it? And then when Galadriel finally gets it back, she just hands the sword, or what we think is the sword, to Arondir, and she doesn't even unwrap it or ask what it is or why it's important. This sword hilt is super important. No, wait, not really. I don't even need to see it. Do you see the contradiction, the inconsistency? So then Arondir hands it to Theo, trusting him with it. And this is the kid who gave the sword to J.R.R, and he just gets it back. Oh, so you're going to have like a powerful moment of this sword, which was a temptation, but is now going to be his redemption. And it's going to take on this new layer of meaning and significance in the narrative. No, it's a decoy. Teachable moment for Theo is over. Waldreg has it and uses it to release the river. So let me get this straight. You're telling me that Sauron's boss, Morgoth, built a dam in the Southlands with the intention of using it on a dormant volcano, but didn't build the tunnels underground that would make that plan work. so that Sauron could maybe one day turn it into a haven for orcs. And then Sauron forged a sword to be a key to release the dam, and then left that key with the humans who lived near the volcano, humans who would die if the key was ever used, in whose best interest it is that the sword is never used at all. And he left it with them for hundreds and hundreds of years, and then Sauron told Adar about his plan, and then Adar tried to kill him, and then Adar dug the tunnels that Morgoth didn't dig, and then later realized that he needed the sword hilt key, and knows exactly which one random village happens to still have it after hundreds of years, but doesn't go and get it immediately. Instead tells his orcs to bring it to him if they find it, and even wages war on said village. And when he finally gets it, he then gives the sword back to the human who used to have it in the first place, and tells him what to do with it, and then that guy destroys his own homeland. Right. So if Adar knew it was there and what it was for, why didn't he already have it? And then there's the whole problem of Sauron's supposed repentance and his trying to avoid this calamity by becoming king of the Southlands. Well, if everything that Adar said is true, then Sauron would have known about this plan and would have been trying to get the sword back himself in order to prevent Adar from doing exactly what he did. Or he would have at least warned the Southlanders that he supposedly cares about to, evacuate or guard the keyhole or tell Galadriel something. In episode 7, he says,
I will not abandon these lands and condemn them to burn.
You already did, my guy. Now, you might say, well, of course he'd say that. He's Sauron. Sauron's probably lying. Well, if that's the case, then he's gone about achieving his real goal in the most roundabout way imaginable. Sauron may be evil, but he ain't that stupid. For a counterexample from a screenwriting perspective, let's contrast this sword hilt key thing with the real symbol that the showrunners were trying to emulate and failed to, the One Ring itself. The ring is what people want, yes, but it's more than that. The ring is an object and a symbol which accomplishes more than a MacGuffin because its meaning and significance changes and grows over time, in addition to driving the plot forward. In fact, the ring is almost a character itself in the original trilogy and is assigned its own volition since it contains part of Sauron's soul, kind of like a Horcrux. Now that's how you make an object to be both memorable and meaningful in a story, which John Truby talks about in his book Anatomy of Story. And I've got a review of that book that I recommend you watch later. So contrast that hugely symbolic object, which drives the character's decisions in Lord of the Rings, to the sword hilt in Rings of Power. It's made to be hugely important and everyone's supposed to want it, and it's even got Sauron's mysterious logo on it. It connects you to the Dark Lord, like when Frodo would touch the One Ring, so it's gotta be hugely significant, right? No, it's kind of like this weird key thingy that makes turning the Southlands into Mordor a little bit more convenient, and then we never see it again. This is a prime example of Rings of Power having a gem of an idea and then squandering it with poor execution. It takes a common high fantasy symbol, the sword and a stone, and flips it to be a negative. It belonged to Sauron, it takes your blood. It's supposed to be like this anti-Andúril, taking the icon from the movies that we all love and then changing it. And it was forged by Sauron, who was a smith, etc. Like, all of this stuff is great. It could have been an amazing idea. I mean, think about it. Adar and Sauron could have fought over the sword, and then if Sauron wins and he could have gotten it, and then he uses it, it would have given him away and revealed who he truly is. Or what if when Arondir gets handed the sword, he starts to turn into an orc? Or the sword could use the blood of its victims to enslave them to Sauron's will. So the more people you kill with it, the more you spread evil. Or Adar could have used the sword on Waldreg, who was supposed to keep the sword safe, but failed to, and then the sword he treasured ends up killing him. Or anything else that would have made this item more than just an evil Swiss Army knife. But the writers, in my opinion, don't use this concept to its full potential because it ends up mostly just being a MacGuffin. We get a couple moments that at least hint that the sword hilt is trying to drive Theo's character arc, but it ends up just being a literal plot device that the characters fight over that lacks any power as an actual symbol that grows in meaning and significance over time. Next up, character. Elrond's contradictory betrayal. Rings of Power's issues aren't really limited just to illogical or convoluted plot holes. I've got a lot of issues with the characters and their arcs in this show, but let's just focus on one. Elrond is supposed to have this arc where he rebuilds a friendship and then that loyalty is tested. So let's see how that actually plays out. And despite the writer's efforts to show Elrond as a conflicted soul we should feel for, this concept gets thrown out the window when Elrond's actions inexplicably contradict everything he says. And not in a way that's intriguing or complex, but in a way that's confusing.
Not an enigma, just a contradiction.
Let's start in episode 4. The dwarves have found a vein of mithril, supposedly brand new to them, and Durin is about to reveal this to Elrond, whom he's suspicious of. And he says,
I need your oath.
Hand to mountain, you'll never breathe so much as a whisper of what I'm about to tell you to another living soul.
Break your promise. And the power of this stone will doom you and your kin to sorrow to your last day on this Middle Earth.
And Elrond responds,
Anything you tell me here will end in my ears alone.
And then in episode 5, Gil-galad says to Elrond,
Then you admit the dwarves did find it, the ore containing the light of the lost Silmaril.
I admit only this. I promised Durin never to reveal his people's secrets.
Right, so we've got this back and forth. Elrond is doubling down. He's not going to betray his friend because he made a promise. And then later he says,
I ask again, and for the last time, did the dwarves find the ore or not?
And again, Elrond says,
I swore an oath to Durin.
To some that may now hold little weight, but in my esteem it is by such things that our very souls are bound. Elrond has taken a stand, right? This is like a central part of his arc. And then Gil-galad says, if the elves die, then Middle-earth is lost to the armies of darkness, and all people are lost, so you should reconsider your oath. But then the very next time we see Elrond, the very next shot, Celebrimbor is handing the mithril back to Elrond. So we build up this tension, this monumental decision for Elrond, and then we don't even see him change his mind? Like so many other important moments in this show, it happens where it can have the least impact possible, off screen. We're told about it rather than seeing and feeling it. 10 out of 10 writing, y'all. If you're gonna have Elrond contradict himself and change his mind, which you don't have to, by the way, why not have that moment on screen? Why not show him struggle with this more, given these stakes? Why not let him discuss it with Durin, who's there in Lindon with him? The last 2 episodes have built this matter up to be so important between the two of them, and now when Elrond betrays his friend, we don't even see it happen? It's a contradiction of both his character, as previously established, and his relationship we've seen him rebuild with Durin. Elrond even tells Celebrimbor,
Well, that now our people are doomed unless I break an oath.
bruh, you already broke it when you told the guy that you're talking to right now. See? Contradiction. And to make this even weirder, in the end, it doesn't even really matter. Once he finds out what's going on, Durin is amused at the fate of all elves in his hands, and he says, don't thank me yet, thank me after we try to convince my father. And then they start joking and laughing, and they walk away. But what did he say back in episode 4?
Dwarven anger outlives even elven memory.
Well, I reckon not. So now even Durin contradicts himself too. It's a setup that was not paid off. Now you could think it's not a contradiction of Elrond's character, since that contradiction is his character. He holds the friendship of Durin to be of high value until compared with the safety of Middle-earth. Elves, like ogres, have layers. Okay, well, maybe. But the escalation and crescendo of that conflict that's been built up needs to be shown and felt, not happen off screen with no consequences. That's how you throw away a character arc. And this is especially maddening since the Durin-Elrond arc is the best plotline of the whole show, and it's ruined by this blatant betrayal of Elrond's character.
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal!
Look, I'm not saying that characters can't contradict themselves. Many times the most interesting characters are the ones that hold 2 contradictory ideas or values in their hearts, and they've got to sort it out as part of their character arc. That's good storytelling. For example, the actions of a character like Severus Snape in Harry Potter is full of contradictions, but by the end of the series, we understand why Snape did what he did as a double and then triple agent. We realize that he cares for Harry because he loved his mother, but also spites Harry because he was bullied by his father. All of those supposed contradictions are set up, heightened, revealed, and then ultimately tied together, resolving into a memorable character with a fascinating arc. What I am saying is if there's a huge shift like this, it needs to be explored or at least explained. Otherwise, it comes off as a jarring or disingenuous 180 and breaks the verisimilitude we expect from good stories. As I said in my article on my blog about logical storytelling, even illogical characters need to be consistent with their illogic. And lastly, theme, the confusingly contradictory and horribly heartless Harfoots. In The Rings of Power, this is supposed to be kind of like the beginning of the Hobbits, the people who love home and family. And what do we see? In episodes 1 and 2, the Harfoots are tight-knit, they're kind of suspicious of outsiders. All right, seems legit, okay, I'm tracking. Then episode 3, we've got them, in this group chant, nobody goes off trail, and nobody walks alone. Okay, nice. They migrate and they stick together, okay, cool. But then right after that, what does she say?
We're going to be left behind.
Hold up, wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Y'all just said nobody walks alone. But if you do walk alone, you get left behind? Are these Harfoots or are these pirates?
Pirates code. Any man who falls behind is left behind.
Yep. These are pirate hobbits. All they need now is the eye patch. And then we've got the head honcho who gets up in front of everybody and explains even further. Says, before our next migration, we'll remember those from our prior migration who fell behind. And then ominously adds,
we remember those who fell behind. Should any Harfoot fall behind this migration, they likewise will be carried with us in our hearts and in our memories.
And then starts to list off people that have been abandoned on the road.
Isles Bright Apple, stuck in the snows of the mountain pass.
We wait for you.
No, you literally didn't. That's why he's dead. Why can't you wait for someone? That's how your community survives, by sticking together. This literally makes no sense. Tolkien would be flabbergasted. And it gets worse. Later on, after they almost did get left behind and die on the road, not Frodo's dad gets up and says,
but there's one thing we can do, I warn. Better than any creature in all Middle-earth, we stay true to each other.
Wow.
No matter how the path winds, or how steep it gets, we face it with our hearts even bigger than our feet.
What? Y'all have no hearts. The Harfoots leave people behind even though they say no one walks alone.
But it seems to me that you're overlooking a glaring contradiction.
And this is especially rich, coming from the guy who was abandoned. Now, if you want a deeper dive into what's wrong with the Harfoots, check out this video from Maxoto. And so what does all this achieve for the Harfoots? Do they learn a lesson? Is Nori's desire for adventure and helping strangers going to lead to a new social change within the ethical framework of her people? No, she'll just leave. The actual hobbits in Lord of the Rings are the perfect counterexample to this type of contradictory nonsense.
I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. A promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee. And I don't mean to. Throughout
that whole trilogy, this promise is tested again and again. And finally, we get the ultimate reversal of this when Frodo asks Sam to leave him. And it's devastating. Frodo nearly dies, then they're reunited, all culminating in one of the most amazing and touching moments in all of cinematic history.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Come on!
So imagine if we applied this Harfoot philosophy to the real hobbits. What would have happened? I mean, did Sam say to Frodo, I know Gandalf said, don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee, but I totally will, as soon as I feel in danger. Did Merry say, I mean, the Shire's nice, but what if we tried living in Mordor for a little bit? Here it's nice there in the summer. Imagine if Frodo had said, I know letting Sauron see where I am and get the ring would be really bad, but maybe I should talk to him and just see what he says. Maybe I can figure out what he really wants. Frodo just needs to touch the darkness, right? If he'd have done that in the beginning, then the Nazgul would have found the ring in the first film, and Middle-earth would have been lost.
Not a great plan.
No, all of these hypotheticals would be ludicrous and completely undermine the message of Tolkien's biblical worldview. And this contradictory theme in the Harfoots ties back to an essential element of Middle-earth, which the creators totally butchered. And that's its worldview message of touching the darkness in order to find the light. That's the opposite of what Tolkien believed and what he wrote. Philosopher and YouTuber Inspiring Philosophy made 2 excellent videos breaking down these differences between the philosophy instantiated in Rings of Power and that of Tolkien. And I highly recommend you check these videos out later, even if you don't consider yourself to be philosophically inclined. Here's a pro tip. Everyone, including you, is a philosopher. The question is, are you doing good philosophy or are you doing bad philosophy? So what does this mean for my fellow screenwriters and storytellers? You've got to understand how an audience's experience of a story is driven in part by their desire for order. In his book on 5-act story structure called Into the Woods, British writer and professor John York explains it this way. Human beings insist on imposing order on any observed phenomena, any new information that comes our way. It's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. While I don't agree with everything that York says in his book, his concept of stories needing to bring disparate pieces of information together into a cohesive order means that even the most non-linear or chaotic stories must at some level have cohesion to their plot, characters, symbols, and themes. Stories are fictional. They are by design not supposed to be as random as real life, and they should bring order, especially in their endings, even if that ending is left somewhat ambiguous. And I'm not even saying you can't use ambiguity or apparent contradictions in your stories, but those elements need to be grounded in logic and addressed by the end of the story. If you have a set of contradictions, it needs to create tension or mystery, not confusion. So what's the difference between those two? And how do you make sure that you avoid problems like this in your own screenplays? It's about consistency. A mystery is still consistent with the universe of the story and reality as we know it, while a contradiction calls that underlying consistency into question. For example, a mystery is an unresolved question which demands investigation to determine an answer. It's like A plus B equals ? And we've got to figure out the answer. The audience has been given pieces of information, and as the characters try to determine what the answer is, so do we. Once the answer is revealed, we might even watch the movie or show again to see the clues we missed, which were there the whole time. And maybe if you're a glutton for punishment, you watched Rings of Power multiple times, and you were able to catch more of those clues the second time around. But that's not what I'm talking about with Rings of Power, which is full of outright inconsistencies and contradictions. Because a contradiction is something being completely opposite or very different from something else, so that either one or the other must be incorrect. It's like if I said A does not equal B, and then later I told you A is equal to B. Well, hang on a minute. They can't both be true.
But that's a contradiction in terms, isn't it?
It's okay if A and B don't usually go together, like oil and water. It's okay if A plus B means there's conflict, since they don't seem to match, and the tension around how they can coexist pulls us together. However, if you deny the laws of logic by saying that A both is and is not B, it's like saying that this liquid both is and is not oil. Those sentences can't both be true in the same sense at the same time. You can't break the laws of logic. It doesn't matter if you're in magical Middle Earth or not.
I can't change the laws of physics.
But that's what Rings of Power tries to do in what feels like a bait and switch. For example, the writers told us that Elrond's biggest thing is swearing an oath to not betray his friend that he's already wronged. That's the stand that Elrond has taken. That's the reality or the logical law that you have established as the writer. But then he breaks that oath and doesn't even acknowledge it? And then when it is acknowledged, Durin barely cares, and there's no consequences. This is more than just his character being complex or his motivation changing. We're talking about the reality of who he is, and what we've been promised as an audience has changed for no apparent reason. And it's the same with the Harfoots. These inconsistencies grow to the point of being contradictory in a manner that is illogical rather than complex. And so when you have contradictions like these that revolve around the reality within the story, then your verisimilitude is broken, whether it's about a plot point, or how a symbol is used, or a character's motivation, or even a theme. Mystery or unsolved tension pulls the viewer in, whereas blatant contradiction pulls the viewer out. Still, just because I intensely disliked the show doesn't mean that there weren't elements of quality in it, or moments of enjoyment for me when I watched the show. It's just that those moments were dwarfed by the shoddy storytelling in so much of the screenwriting. I mean, Rings of Power truly had potential. I mean, the idea of how Mordor was made, or the downfall of Numenor, the origin of the orcs, all of these are ideas which are intriguing to explore. But the execution of those ideas left much to be desired from a screenwriting perspective. And this failure of delivering on its potential should make all writers, including myself, want to examine our own work to ensure that we're checking our creative blind spots and not making these same mistakes. As a filmmaker myself, I understand how hard it is to bring an idea to fruition, even under the best of circumstances. And adapting any kind of Tolkien IP brings with it a huge amount of pressure, even if you do have nearly $1 billion to work with. And for more on that, you can see my video on Rings of Power's intellectual property and why it was doomed to fail from the beginning. So to that end, I want to offer every screenwriter and storyteller watching a chance to learn how to outline a story based on characters and their needs, rather than what a giant studio wants. And that's why I created How to Outline Your Screenplay. This is a quick online course that shows you in bite-sized videos how I outline my screenplays and how you can apply these type of techniques to your storytelling and writing process.
To tell a story so well it becomes real.
You'll learn things like why outlining doesn't hinder your creativity, even though it might feel like it sometimes. How to use character arcs to guide your story structure, and productive ways to break your stories so that you can move forward in them with confidence. This takes my years of writing and what I learned about screenwriting at 2 different film schools and distills it down into bite-sized pieces that you can apply to your own writing process. If you want to make sure that your outline is logical and consistent and character-driven from the very beginning, then go get my course, How to Outline Your Screenplay.
Buy a ticket, son. Tell a story.